This is the lecture for Ancient and Medieval History for Wednesday, the 8th of September, 2021. We are open to the second page of our notebook, of our notepack, the background to the terror atrocities of September the 11th, 2001. Early on the morning of Tuesday, September the 11th, 2001, two men passed through the Portland Jetport. Portland International Jetport was about 45 minutes away from where I was living in Maine. One of those men was named Mohammed Atta. Along with 17 other people, these two men were converging on John F. Kennedy Airport in New York and Logan Airport in Boston. Their goal was to board flights heading to the West Coast. 4 of them. They boarded these flights early on. They managed to sneak box cutters, razor knives, through security. 2 of the flights headed out of Boston, 2 out of New York. Cross-country flights were chosen because the planes were larger and their fuel was filled up. This isn't always the case if a plane is going on a shorter route. At a prearranged time, after the planes reached altitude, the terrorists took out their razor knives. Now, in a Hollywood movie, they would threaten people, brandishing them. Grab the person in front of them by the hair, slit. That's the attention getter. When they had everyone's attention, having murdered people in front of their eyes, spreading arterial blood everywhere, the terrorists moved all of the passengers to the rear of the plane, back at the back of the coach. They proceeded to go to the cockpit, and they demanded entry. In those days, airplane cockpits weren't necessarily locked, or lockable, or securable. And besides, everyone knew what to do in the case of a hijack. Hijackings had been going on as a not unusual occurrence since at least the 1970s, the early 1970s. So, what you do, what your training is, this is the training of the air crews, the pilots, the stewardesses at that time, was you comply with the hijacker's demands. Because the expectation is the hijacker is going to divert the planes to Cuba or to some other unfriendly area, an area unfriendly to the United States, where the local police and military will not interfere with the hijackers. In fact, where they may already have partnered with this local government to extort demands from the United States in return for the hostages' safety. In other words, the hostages are bargaining chips, and a bargaining chip that's dead is useless. So, if you're a member of the air crew, you comply. Unusually, the air crew was hustled quite quickly out of the cockpits towards the back, and they were put with everyone else. Apparently, these terrorists knew how to fly a jetliner. At least, we hope so. So far, it's a bad thing. The fact that it happens almost simultaneously on 4 different flights, that's pretty unusual. But the planes don't head for Havana, Cuba. 2 of them head to New York City, and 2 of them head towards Washington, D.C. New York City, at that time, was vying with London to be the financial capital of the world, and obviously Washington, D.C. is the capital of the free world. These 19 hijackers had trained in American flight schools. They knew how to maneuver a plane in flight. They weren't particularly interested, their instructors later said, in learning to take off or land. first thing anybody knew, there was a jetliner at skyscraper level tearing down the Hudson River from the north. It winged over and targeted the tower and hit it right about here. This was not an accident. This was a sweet spot that had been planned. It was key to the attack, to hit the building at the right spot. Now, most of you have some experience with being at least near a jetliner. They're huge. This jetliner was moving close to the speed of sound. It was diving in a shallow dive at the building, filled with jet fuel. When it hit the building, it hit a building that was designed very unusually. This is also by design, and I will explain it. But it was like the proverbial irresistible force encountering the proverbial immovable object. The laws of Newtonian physics, as we understand them, broke down, and both the plane and the areas of the building kissed by the plane initially disintegrated. They were no longer solid objects. Instead, you have energy shooting through the building and blowing out the other side, killing people on the ground, killing everyone on the jetliner, and immediately killing scores of people. A few minutes later, a second jetliner comes in from another angle and into the second tower at about the same level. Same thing. Laws of physics break down. You have an almost atomic bomb level conversion of matter into energy. Not quite, but close, because of the massive forces involved. Fires began. Now, everyone knew, just like everyone knew that you obey hijackers because they want to keep everyone alive as bargaining chips, everyone knew what happens if a skyscraper catches fire. New York City's fire department had been dealing with this horror show for a while because skyscrapers began being built in the 1880s and 90s in New York City. And the truth is that fire departments are really good at stopping fires in buildings less than 10 stories tall. Taller than that, the equipment doesn't really work. So, what you do in a building like this is you have a massive fire suppression system, which activates, and you evacuate from the roof. There were helipads on both of these roofs. And so every helicopter in the greater New York area that was airborne began winging towards the World Trade Center towers. And every emergency chopper in the greater New York area get ready to take off and head there. The people on the planes were already dead. The people in the blast effect area in the buildings and on the ground were already dead or wounded. Nothing you can do about that. But you can evacuate everyone above the fire. And meanwhile, everyone below the fire is evacuating down through the stairwells. You can't use elevators in a fire. Bad idea. Meanwhile, as the helicopters are approaching, on the ground, every New York police officer, fire department, fireman, and ambulance worker is making their way towards the towers, but they are, slowed down by traffic. Even a fire truck or a police cruiser with full sirens and lights cannot move through a solid wall of New York traffic. Not quickly. Still, people are coming out, and the police and fire are going in. Highest ranking people first. A massive number of captains, which is a very high rank in both the New York Police and Fire Department, enter these buildings to take command, try to get people in wheelchairs out, try to spot where the fire is, try to control the firefighting process. This was not the first time these buildings had been bombed. In 1993, a blind Arab sheikh had arranged for a terror cell located, I think, in New Jersey, to rent a van, fill it with explosives, and drive it into one of the underground parking lots, which were massive under these buildings. The van would then be exploded and would collapse the foundation of one of the towers so that it would fall into the other tower. That was the plan. A few things didn't work. Number one, they didn't have nearly enough explosives. Number two, Yamazaki, the architect, built these buildings to last. So, in 1993, there was a piffle. Unless you were close, there were a few people killed, but not too many. Basically, there was a down below, and people in these buildings wondered what the heck had happened. Well, what had happened is the van bomb detonates, killing some people down there, but it doesn't fundamentally alter anything about the structure of the building. It does some cosmetic damage, some very, very minor structural damage, which is easily repaired. Still, the buildings are evacuated, the fire department goes in, and an investigation begins. God, Voltaire, the philosopher, once said, I had but one prayer to God, that he make my enemies ridiculous, and lo, he granted that prayer. In this case, the terrorists had rented the van under their real names. So we found them, arrested them, interrogated them, and got the information about it. So people assumed that, okay, the buildings are on fire, it's worse than 93, but still we can fight this thing that these buildings are built to last. However, things began to go wrong when the helicopters couldn't approach the buildings, because the heat bloom coming off of these buildings turned the air around the towers into a roiling mess. A helicopter's aerodynamics depends upon a rotor capturing enough air to keep it airborne and maneuvering. Couldn't happen. No one could approach these buildings. The fire was too hot. It was unexpected. That means that everyone above the fires is already dead. They just don't know it yet. The helicopters withdraw. People continue to approach the building from the ground floor, and the hope is that they can stop the fire before everyone up here is dead. Now we go to why the planes hit where they hit. Yamazaki, the architect, wanted to build buildings like no other. A skyscraper has a skeleton of steel girders, clad in stone and glass for like an old-style skyscraper like the Empire State Building. In fact, a heavy bomber, hit the Empire State Building in 1944 during World War II. It wasn't loaded with bombs, but it's still a big plane filled with fuel, and it killed the people on board the plane. It was foggy. They lost track. The Empire State Building is really tall, and so they hit it. But it was on a weekend. Not many people were in the building, so the casualties were fairly low, and the building was not seriously damaged, because the Empire State Building had its steel girders primarily in the center. The walls had some stone, so they gave some support, but basically you've got the weight of the floors above distributed in the center of the building. Later skyscrapers in the international movement had glass walls. The structure was moved inward to the heart of the building. The elevators, the utilities, plumbing, electricity, all came up through this central node. And so the walls were basically to keep the wind out and the pigeons. So you have these beautiful glass cubes that come up, or parallelograms or rectangles. Most modern skyscrapers don't distribute as fully as the Empire State Building did. They don't have stone walls. They have light glass walls with a steel central structure. But the problem with that is Every time you have structural support, it blocks the view and it blocks the use. The Empire State Building has a distributed structure throughout. Modern international style glass and steel skyscrapers have this sort of torus, this sort of square donut shape, with a center that can't be used. Yamazaki wants to use as much internal space as possible, and he also wants to create the illusion of light. So what he did was he had built the building with the outer walls as supports. They are a vertical set of alloyed struts that go from the bottom through the ventilation, through the center, through the ventilation, all the way to the top. Now, there were segments, but basically it was built walls, floors, and then everything else. The walls were the primary support. No one builds skyscrapers like this except this Japanese architect. The consequence was that since you didn't need a strong set of struts throughout the building like in the Empire State, or in the center like in glass and steel, you got all this open space. And when you leave the elevator on the observation deck, you see this vertical sort of set of pinstripe slats, and you've got tall vertical clear space, strut, tall vertical clear space, strut, tall vertical clear space, strut. And the human eye does not track to darkness. It tracks to light. So the eye is fooled to almost see that the ceiling is floating on nothing but glass. You don't have internal struts, and the walls are almost invisible from the center of the building because the struts are so narrow. We see the light coming through, not the shadows. This is all by design. Now, the World Trade Center was very well built. It was tough. It had handled hurricanes. It had handled minor impacts. I think a small commercial plane, private plane hit it at one point a few years before. These things are built to hold King Kong if necessary. They're built to last. But the planners in the Al-Qaeda organization had some pretty brilliant engineers too. And they found a way to defeat Yamazaki's structural plan. All has to do with having a massive enough force, with enough aviation fuel, hitting at just the right spot. That was the key to everything. By hitting up here and blowing through, by hitting up here and blowing through, the aviation gas is distributed all over the place. The jet fuel is literally everywhere within the splash zone of the explosions. Now, the aviation fuel itself burns up pretty quickly, but having the sudden loss of the supports because of the holes and the sudden fires caused by the jet fuel, even that wasn't enough to defeat Yamazaki's structure. But these were office buildings. Can any of you guess what was in these office buildings that the terrorists counted on to make it happen?
Asbestos?
Actually, asbestos would have defeated their plan if we had more of it. People stopped using asbestos around the time these buildings were built because asbestos is fireproof, but it also is a highly cancerous substance.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if these tiles are asbestos. They might be. If you leave them alone, they're fine. If you mess with them constantly, you get fibers in the air. But it's still fairly minor. Good guess, though. But asbestos would actually, as a fire retardant, have been against the terrorists' plan. What does every office that you've ever seen have a lot of? Yeah.
People?
Well, yeah, and people are flammable, but we're also mostly water, so to set a human on fire actually requires a hefty amount of combustion. Good guess. Yep.
Cubicles?
Cubicles have sort of flammable cloth on them often. There's something else, yes?
Like files, like papers.
Paper! On the nose. Paper. If you go camping or if you start a fire in your grill, if it's not a gas grill, What do you often use for kindling? The terrorists understood that the jet fuel alone wouldn't be enough, but by combusting all of the paper, bit by bit by bit, you're creating a heat bloom enough to defeat the helicopters coming. A bloom so hot that many of the people up here roasted before they died. The paper heats the fire up even. Now, if you have to jump out of a building, you might as well try to fly. You've got nothing to lose. Most people would rather jump out of a building than burn to death. Burning to death is a horrible way to die. Problem is that as the people up here began to feel the heat, at first they were going to go for the roof and go for the evacuation by helicopter. But it became clear pretty soon that that wasn't happening. Now, the people on the roof, they had a choice. They could get to the roof. Not everyone could get to the roof, so people are locked in on their office's floor. It's getting worse. Some people called and told their family they loved them before they passed. Some people decided, here's about the size of a human being. You can't fit through these slats easily. So they broke the glass however they could. It wasn't easy, because it used basically bulletproof glass. They broke the glass, as desperate people can find a way, and the heat had made the glass less strong. And then they had to literally scrape their flesh off as they tried squeezing through these narrow slots. A person like me would never have made it. Somebody your size probably would, with minimal damage. But then you're somewhere between the 75th and the 110th floor, and there are no fire escapes. So you jump. And I don't recommend that you look. There are some cameramen that showed people doing that who had already caught fire. It's not a pretty sight. But even that wasn't the purpose. As the fire heated up, it reached close to the melting point of this alloy. That was the purpose. Because as the alloy melted, the structure supporting the floors above buckled. And the floor, the concrete floor, pancaked. And the moment the first concrete floor pancaked onto the floor below it, it then pancaked. The structure above came down, and the buildings came down as if they were demolished. That's why so little of the buildings were left, because and so few bodies, because people were basically pancaked under concrete again and again and again as the buildings go down. So you have the fire melt the structure of the building, causing this floor to pancake down on this, and nothing, not a human body, not furniture, nothing's going to stop that. So it's down into their basement holes with a lot of debris becoming airborne, but that's largely small debris. The same thing basically happens in both towers because of the paper. The terrorists had figured out that the paper would make the fire hot enough that would make their plan possible. What was their intent in New York? A few intents. First off, the Tower of Babel story is a story known to Christians, Jews, and Muslims. The thought of human beings building a tower so tall that they could look God in the eye as a prideful act worthy of divine retribution is part of it. The idea of a tower collapsing. Even in tarot cards, the tower is considered to be a sign of disaster and doom. So the thought of the faithful destroying the towers of prideful man, but that's not all. It was the World Trade Center. Lots of non-American people were killed as these buildings collapsed because we had people from all over the world engaged in trade. It wasn't simply a name, it was the function of this and a bunch of buildings around it, the entire plaza. There is still a World Trade Center in this spot with the Freedom Tower. Honestly, if they had listened to me, they would have had a series of 5 buildings. And you'll excuse me, I'm about to do something that's obscene. You would have a building here, a building here, a building here, a building here, and a really tall building in the middle. That's what I wanted to build. The tallest middle finger ever made. That's what I wanted. I wanted it to be taller than these buildings were. Instead, they come up with the Freedom Tower. I'm going to my sense of humor is sometimes very basic, but no, an act of defiance is what was necessary. In any case, the towers come down because it's the World Trade Center, because it's a tower, and also because of this. Our terrorist enemies were not trying to fight fair. If you're in a real fight or a real war, you don't fight fair. You fight to survive. You fight to win. In 1941, December 7th, the Imperial Japanese Navy launched a sneak attack on Battleship Row at the U.S. Naval Base at Pearl Harbor, Oahu, Hawaii. In this sneak attack that happened around 7 a.m. local time Sunday morning, our battleship force was completely sunk or damaged to the point where it was unusable. Now, for the most part, the Japanese were able to do this with fairly few casualties because it was a sneak attack. However, in the second wave, they did begin to take some damage. There were a couple of P-40 Hawks that took off to fight, shooting down a Zero or two, or a plane or two. And there were some Japanese planes shot down by anti-aircraft fire. Because the Japanese, at least, had picked a military target. The Japanese Empire, on December 7th, 1941, didn't attack American civilians. They attacked the American Navy base. We'll talk about that next year, because there's all sorts of details around this. Our terrorist enemies did not pick a military base. They picked two of the most proud large office buildings in the world, each again designed to hold between 5,000 and 10,000 people. So we're talking between 10 and 20,000 people at full capacity. They were looking to inflict maximum casualties without having anyone shoot back. They were not soldiers. They were criminals. So the towers come down. And for the next several months, the air in southern Manhattan is very toxic because of all the particulate matter that went airborne and basically clung to the area. Okay, that's the first two planes. Plane number 3 is on its way to the White House. However, I remember listening on my way to school that morning that President George W. Bush had gone to Florida as part of his wife's literacy initiative. Laura Bush, the First Lady, was the school librarian before she got married. And every First Lady should have a cause. And her cause was encouraging young people to read. So the president was in Florida reading to kindergartners, reading to school children. And the terrorists must have gotten wind of that. So there's this incongruous scene of a jetliner sailing over Washington, D.C. at close to the speed of sound, circling, looking for a secondary target. Because there's no point in destroying the White House if the president is definitely not there. Their goal was to hit Bush as well as the White House. So instead of hitting the White House, they go to their secondary target, which is, in fact, the largest office building on the planet. This is a simplified diagram. The Pentagon has 5 sides, but it also has a central plaza and a concentric series of pentagon-shaped rings around that plaza with office blocks all the way through. It was and is the largest office building on the planet. It is also the military headquarters of the United States. It is not a base. It didn't have aircraft ready to fight. It didn't have massive numbers of anti-aircraft guns or missiles. If this had been Moscow, that plane would have been shot down too sweet. This is Washington, D.C. So the plane is circling around, and most people think, oh my God, it's a disaster. They're looking to land on the Potomac River. No. The terrorists fly their plane into the Navy wing of the Pentagon. However, the Pentagon is not 110 stories tall. It's less than 10 stories tall. And it's made of stone with a steel, with a little bit of with steel structure and a little bit of glass. It's much more like the Empire State Building, but it's short. The reason it's so big as an office building is it's dispersed over a vast amount of land. So when the plane hits the Navy facility, a couple of hundred Americans are killed. Everyone on the plane is killed, but the damage is fairly easily reparable, and within 6 months, the Navy wing is functioning normally. Within a year, the cosmetic damage had been repaired. Now, they hit the Pentagon because large office building, because symbol, America's military headquarters, but also because there's this unfounded rumor that underneath the Pentagon is a hidden nuclear power plant. And if they had managed to hit an underground nuclear power plant, they could have irradiated much of the East Coast. In fact, we are very lucky that the terrorists did not choose to attack nuclear power plants. Had they hit the Millstone nuclear reactors in Connecticut or any of the other nuclear reactors on the East Coast, if they had hit properly with the skill that they hit these buildings, they could have spread radioactive fallout across the most populous region of the United States, the Washington, New York, Boston corridor, which is basically one big suburb with cities interspersed. Thank God they didn't. Still, they killed a lot of people and everyone on the plane. The last plane was a few minutes late. It had been late taking off, so everything was done a little bit late. Now, the air traffic control system had figured out what had gone wrong. These planes, all of them, the three of them that had already hit, I got to replace that light bulb, had dropped off the radar. And so, as the planes were wending their way towards the Twin Towers and towards Washington, D.C., the air traffic control system was prepping the areas near where they disappeared from radar for crashes. They assumed something had happened to the planes, and the planes were going down. Radar works over a certain altitude. It doesn't work at ground level because of all the clutter, buildings, trees, things like that. Usually a few hundred feet for civilian radar. So these planes had dropped off the radar. Nobody expected it. By this point, by the time the fourth plane was over western Pennsylvania, the plane was being tracked, and people had a sense of what was going on because the towers and the Pentagon had already been attacked. So our military was beginning to respond. At this point, President Bush gets the word, and there's film of this. He's reading a book on a stool to a bunch of kindergartners, and an aide walks in, bends down, whispers in his ear. He pauses for a moment, goes, and keeps reading to the kids. He finishes the story, says thank you to the kids, hands everything over. Very calmly, he walks out. Now, you can see in his eyes, there's something big going on. But he did not panic the kids. How can I put this diplomatically? A film was made about this by the fat socialist weasel Michael Moore, who basically blamed Bush for not getting up and shouting, "They burn it! They burn it!" and running out, panicking the kids for no reason. The president chose to think things through. There was nothing he could do within the next 5 minutes that his people weren't already doing. You don't panic school children unless there's a good reason to. He did what I think is the right thing. But politics is a nasty business, so there are people who damn him for not panicking and running out and scaring the bejesus out of those little kids for no good reason. The fourth plane is late. And people in the back of the fourth plane have cell phones, and they're contacting family members and they learned that this morning 3 planes were kidnapped, hijacked, just like they were, but they didn't go to Havana. They didn't go to some communist country. They were being used as guided missiles to kill thousands of people on the ground. No one knew at this point what the casualties were. Given a choice between dying like sheep or dying like wolves or dogs, a number of the people in the back of this plane say we have got to try to take the plane. Todd Beamer was one such fellow. And in the last call that he made to his wife, his last words that she heard after he had told her he loved her was, "Let's roll." And he and the others, the pilots, the crew, surged forward. Many of them were killed by the terrorists, but they at least got to the cockpit. They took control from the terrorists, but they were not able to gain control of the plane themselves. And so the plane cratered into a farm field in western Pennsylvania. Now, I'll tell you quite honestly, when this all happened, I was personally convinced that the plane had been shot down by an American aircraft, and I would have supported that. If terrorists are going to use aircraft filled with civilians as guided missiles, you have a choice between saving the thousands of people on the ground that they're going to target and all the chaos and damage they're going to do, or shooting down the plane yourself. I would have supported the choice to shoot down the plane, kill the people on board, and prevent it from doing more damage on the ground. But in the 20 years since, I have been persuaded that my intuition was wrong and that the plane went down as a result of the passengers and crew trying to retake control. Americans everywhere who were aware then remember what they were doing when they first saw the footage or learned what was happening. I told you a brief version of my story yesterday. American airspace was locked down. Military fighters flew over all of our cities in a way that's not usual. We were happy to see them because no flights were allowed anywhere in the United States except for military aircraft. During that time, we learned that the Al-Qaeda organization had claimed credit and were based out of Afghanistan. And a month after 9/11, we invaded Afghanistan. We sent in CIA people first to make contact with a group of tribes called the Northern Alliance to overthrow the Taliban, which we were able to do in about 3 or 4 months. The Pakistani military and the Chinese Communist Party then saved the Taliban, hid them in the tribal regions of North Pakistan, waiting for a time when we would grow weary of the war. Meanwhile, in the United States, granular is the name of a disease. It affects cattle and human beings, and it was mailed through the mail to various people. The mail was actually sent through my high school post office in Wallingford, Connecticut. That's where I lived in high school. Oh, God, it's at the tip of my tongue. Do any of you know any cattle diseases that are also human? I can't believe I forgot this. Yeah? Yeah.
Oh, is it mad cow?
No, it wasn't mad cow, but that's a good guess. Okay. Bad me for not remembering the name of the disease. It's a common name. If once somebody says it, we'll all know it. In any event, this highly toxic disease has been sent to the mail to several American leaders. So it looks like the terrorism is going on. Even though it's not happening from the air, this was a coordinated attack, 4 aircraft at the same time. What else? We're waiting for the other shoe to drop. That irritates me. Anyway, the other shoe seems to be some snipers in the Washington, D.C. area who began shooting at people on the highway, killing them, shooting at people as they fill their car at a gas station. So we've now got snipers that are just terrorizing people, all out of proportion to the damage they're doing. Imagine suddenly that we had snipers in this area that were just shooting at civilians randomly. Very hard to deal with something like that. Ultimately, John Alid Mohammed and John Malvo, who was a teenager, John Allen Mohammed was an African-American Muslim, were found, arrested, and put away. But for about a month, they terrorized the entire Washington, D.C. area. We are lucky that they didn't hit the nuclear power plants. We're lucky that they didn't hit hydroelectric dams and flood out massive areas. We're lucky about a lot of things. But we began the war in Afghanistan to get rid of the Taliban and Al-Qaeda. A lot of Americans never recovered. Over 3,000 Americans were killed on 9/11, mostly in the Twin Towers as they collapsed. Massive numbers of firemen and police were killed in the Twin Towers as they collapsed. Everyone on the planes, people in the Pentagon, the people on the ground around, secondary casualties. But the thought that we are safe, that we're at peace because nobody's at war with us, that has left, or that did leave, a lot of Americans. The potential for risk in our environment changed how we look at a lot of things. And a lot of Americans wondered, where does such hate come from? Such palpable hate that it can reach out from half a world away and not only destroy iconic buildings, but kill thousands of our people. Many of our people on the left immediately reflexively blamed us. There were people in the media and in colleges. What did America do to provoke such hatred? And there are some people that still primarily blame us for what the terrorists did. I think of this as a form of political and philosophical masochism, whereby you blame America first because you've got to be at the center of everything. Narcissism, the sense of self-obsession. Now, there are reasons why we are enemies with them and why they are enemies with us. One reason is that our way of life is very good to its people. No one in the world who is a common person has lived as well as Americans and people in Western Europe and people in the developed parts of Australia and South Africa. No. We, the average citizen of Western countries, live like Olympian gods, but we live a secular lifestyle. Many of us are religious, but God and His church are not at the center of everything. We allow Satanists in our midst. We allow atheists in our midst. We allow homosexuals in our midst. We allow a number of things that the Quran forbids. We also do not permit child marriages, child weddings, arranged marriages, honor killings, or the dismemberment of criminals, which Sharia law, Islamic law that is Quranic, does permit. In fact, in many ways, insists upon. We are a pluralistic, secular, tolerant society. We're not perfect. Nobody is. That lifestyle is appealing. And so the people who have a medieval worldview, who want to drag us back to the time of the Prophet Muhammad, to a time of religious war and religious law, they don't want us to be comfortable. The United States is the great Satan. Israel is the lesser Satan. We must be destroyed, mentally, emotionally, and our power must be destroyed as much as possible physically. So our culture is an enemy to their culture because our culture stands for things that the Islamic fundamentalists hate. Number two, they claim that we stand in the way of a new caliphate. Caliphate is an Islamic term for a holy empire. A holy empire of Islam that they would like to establish between Morocco on the Atlantic Ocean and Pakistan on the Indus River. A huge swath of territory from the Atlantic across North Africa through the Middle East, across Iran to northwestern India, and then beyond to Malaysia and the southern island of Mindanao in the Philippines. An Islamic empire stretching across the Eurasian landmass from the Atlantic, ultimately past the Indian Ocean to the Pacific. They think we stand in the way of them doing that. We damn well do. Letting an empire that is fundamentally hostile to us cohere in such a way that it controls the world's crossroads, controls the world's oil supply, controls much of the world's resources, would be incredibly suicidal. We're not going to let them do it. So in that sense, we do stand in their way. And we do also stand for freedom. This is not a simple thing. They think of it as a war of civilizations. They are committed to victory. You look around and talk to most Americans, they'll think the war on terror is something that happened a long time ago. Many Americans do not take it seriously. 20 years. We left Afghanistan last week. And not well. The start of this story happens almost 4,000 years ago. So now we go into the notes. Unless you have any questions or comments or thoughts. Okay, I see now. The world's first civilization is in what we would call southern Iraq, Sumeria or Sumer. City-states like Uruk and Ur, built around pyramidal observatories called ziggurats. And these city-states had the high technology of the wheel. And if you don't think the wheel is a big deal, try imagining life without it. There is a shepherd outside of one of these cities named Abram. And Abram comes home one day from his work with the sheep to his wives and to his family clan, to his servants and slaves, and says, "You wouldn't believe what happened to me today." "What?" his family asks. "God spoke to me." "God spoke to you, huh? Hey, was it the goddess of love?" And the wife says, "Shut up." "Was it the god of gambling? Or the god of secrets and blackmail?" "Maybe it was the god of sheep, giving you health. It wasn't the god of plague or war, was it?" And Abram says, No. You don't understand. I didn't understand until God spoke to me. God, singular, spoke to me. Right. God. Like there's only one. You're telling me that the same God that made first love's first kiss made the kind of wasting death that is leprosy. You're telling me that the same God that made kittens put snakes in the grass. God. Come on. It's self-evident that there are many forces at work in the universe, some baleful, some helpful, some evil, some good. God. And Abram says, yep, God. Omniscient, all-knowing, omnipotent, all-powerful. God, the creator of everything, all that is seen and unseen. That God. Right. The ancient mind, the pagan mind, simply could not grasp the notion of a single creator of everything, because the world is so filled with mutual contradiction. And what did God say? God said that I, along with all of my people, should leave this place, and that he would bring us to a promised land. Right. You know that the only places that have real cities are around here. And we barely are accepted by those people because we bring in herd products from our sheep and goats. And you want us to leave and go out to another city that doesn't even know us, or worse, among the barbarians that'll just slay us? And Abram says, right, that's what we're going to do. That is what God told me to do, and I am saying yes. So there was a division. Those people that absolutely refused found a way to get away if they could, unless they were slaves. But Abram, his wife, his brothers and sisters, his nephews and nieces, his slaves, he didn't have any children. They all got up and left and headed northwestward towards northern Iraq, a place called Haran, and then who knows beyond that. Now, when you're in a car on a trip in America, the trip can become boring. Children often say, "Are we there yet?" No. "Are we there yet?" No. "Are we there yet?" No! "We're not there yet." "I have to go to the bathroom." "Okay, we'll stop at a rest area. Or we'll stop by the side of the road and you can discover the joy of bushes. But in any case, you're in a car. On a highway, you move at faster than a mile a minute. Most of you have heating and air conditioning in your vehicles. If not, you can roll down the windows and get cool like that. You've got all the stuff you need packed away. Maybe you've got your pets. But there are roads. There are garages to repair your car if it breaks down. There are gas stations. There are restaurants and hotels. Traveling in the United States on the ground isn't as quick as air travel, isn't as comfortable in some ways as train travel or ship travel, but it's amazingly fast and comfortable. These guys had to walk everywhere at the speed of goat. And if you've ever seen a little baby goat, their little legs can move fast. But you don't know. And what Abram said in response to "Are we there yet?" is, "I don't know. God hasn't told me yet where we're going." Right. Have a good day. See you tomorrow.
Have a good day, Mr. Victoria.
And you also. Thank you.